In this video we're going to be looking at cutting layered pralines. I've got a piece of equipment here in front of me which is fantastic for doing the job. Let's just talk through it slightly. You've got the actual cutter, the wire cutter that comes along. The machine itself is called a praline cutter. Some people might refer to it as a guitar. The wires are really taut, as you can hear. Different widths of wires for different sizes of pralines that you require. Before we use it, we must always make sure that all the wires are nice and clean, probably using a paper towel or something like that to wipe down. We've got a butt edge there that we place the praline up to prevent it from moving on the cutting process. The praline we're going to use on this must be of a cuttable consistency. It's great for a wide range of cutting mediums, such as soft fudges, jellies, nougat montelimars and ganaches. Once we've placed the actual commodity on the cutting base, we then pull down the wire cutter through in a smooth movement to cut away. Once we've cut in one direction, we use the release tray to lift the praline up, to turn round before we give it its second cut, finishing up with perfectly uniform, straight-edged pralines. Now let's look at the actual demolding and the cutting of the praline here. We've got a single layered one here, which is now set sufficiently so we can demold it. The first thing we do is just take a small sharp knife, quite a thin bladed knife, and just run it round the tray itself, keeping a straight line. Then we take the release tray, which has got a sheet of silicone paper on there, which I'm just going to place on the top, taking both trays now and inverting them over, and fingers crossed. You've got the praline. Then we just release the silicone paper away from it, like so. The next stage we've got to do now is prepare it for cutting on the praline cutter. What we need to do, because it's quite a soft, textured product, we need to form a base so that when the blades go through it, you're going to get a cut, but then a straight bottom. So you're going to get a perfect square piece of praline. This base also facilitates the lifting and the turning of the praline for its second cut. There are a couple of ways of doing this for putting the layer of chocolate on. One is to use a palette knife and to spread it out. For the less experienced person who's just starting this process, a paint roller. So the first technique then I'm going to show you is using the palette knife and a ladle using tempered couverture. One other little key point we need to remember is the temperature of this praline. If the praline is too cold, if it's just come from the refrigerator, as soon as the tempered couverture goes onto it, it's going to set. When you start putting it through the cutter then, you're going to get a cracking effect, which we really don't want. We just want the chocolate just to have almost gone off, straight on, cut, so that the setting then happens later. So if we take a ladle full now of the tempered couverture, just turn the plate round. I've still kept it on the silicone paper for the overflow really, and then just spread some of the couverture onto the praline, and then all we do then is just evenly pallet it out. So what we've achieved now, it's a thin layer of coated chocolate in readiness now for cutting on the praline cutter. What I need to do now then is just leave it to stand about 30 seconds or so, just touching it so it's just started to go off. Then we're going to start with the fun part of transferring it onto the cutter and then cutting out these fantastic shapes. Right, we're ready now for the cutting process. I'm just testing the chocolate that we coated earlier. It's been there for about 30 seconds now. It's just starting to go off, so I'm ready for the cutting process. I'm lifting the wire from the machine up now, making sure that it's nice and clean. Taking the praline and we're going chocolate side down. I'm just inverting it now onto the frame and then buttoning it up against the stopper there. We're taking the cutter now, bringing it down slowly, and with a gentle motion we cut through. And as you can see, we've got perfect straight lines. I'm going to take the take-off tray now, placing it underneath, and then one movement, lifting off the pralines. And you can see that chocolate that we put on the base there has helped that process. We place that now on the table, lifting the blade up again. Obviously, we've got all the chocolate that's stuck to the wires there. So before we complete the next stage, we need to clean these off. Just using a piece of dry paper towel. The last thing you want to now is introduce any moisture into the product, so it's important that we're using something dry. So we're going to place this now back onto the frame, and once again with one gentle movement, cut through, taking the take-off release tray, getting it flat first of all, so notice how I'm putting my hand there to press it down. One movement, up it comes, onto the table, and there you are. We've got perfect cut squares of praline. Now we're going to look at cutting a doubled layer praline. This particular one has got a dark base ganache, and we've got a passion fruit jelly on the top, which has been set with pectin. We've had it in the fridge, just testing it again, and it's set sufficiently. So it's the same process again, small, sharp knife again, bring it round the side, cutting right the way through. With this particular one, with it being a sticky substance, I always like to make sure that it's loose first. Silicone paper on top, and the reason why we're using silicone is that it's not going to take any of the moisture. Release tray on top of there, invert over, and then gently peeling it away. So we've got something looking like that. So where we've got the ganache now on the base, and once again taking away the silicone paper, I'm just going to trim the paper down here, the silicone, so I'm not working with too much paper at one stage. Once again, we've got to coat it now with chocolate to facilitate that cutting process. Another way of doing this, just another technique which you might want to use, is using a paint roller. But obviously it's only being used for chocolate and not for emulsioning the walls. Bit of curvature, that's tempered again. And I'm just going to put this onto a tray. Taking your roller, just as you would at home when you're motioning, thinning it out. And then just brushing it along the base of the ganache. It gives probably more of a matte finish, but you're not going to see that when it's enrobed. All I'm wanting it to do is form that cutting base. So there we are. Once again, I've got to allow now the chocolate to go off. Doesn't need to be too firm, doesn't need to be too soft. So I'm just testing it before we can do anything. So I'm going to leave that now for about 30 seconds again, refrigeration, for it to set off prior to cutting. Right, I've just taken this out of the refrigerator now. I'm just going to test whether the chocolate, and it's just right, it's not fully set, it's ready for working. So once again, I've lifted up the blade, I've made sure that the wires are all clean. Lifting up the praline, on it goes. Peeling back the silicone paper. And that's the reason why we're using silicone. Right, a little thing now about what I'm cutting. I've got a soft top and I've got a firmer base. Whenever you're working with layered pralines, you always need to ensure that the softer layer is always facing upwards. If we did it the reverse way, the pressure of the harder base would squash the lower base. So the softer one is always facing uppermost. Same again, we bring down the praline cutter with a gentle cut. Sometimes you might need to apply a little more pressure. Taking the tray grain to release, and it goes. Lifting the wire back, and once again, ensuring that each of these wires we've cleaned thoroughly. So same as before. On we go. Line it up against the butt there. Once again, just cutting straight through. It's a lot easier now because the ganache has softened up slightly. Same again, taking the release tray, patting down to get it flat, and with one movement, there you go, off it comes, and once again we've got beautiful, uniform, cut pralines with the jelly uppermost, ready for dipping. If you've not got the luxury of a praline cutter, you then might want to cut the pralines by hand. A good way of doing this is to use a 5-wheel simple cutter, used for lots of things in the pastry area and the bakery. You can open these up to various thicknesses with a little screw there at one side, and then what you do then is just tighten it up. Right, so once we've got the wheel set at the right distance and we've secured the bolt at the end there, we just place the wheels at one end of the ganache and then just applying pressure. We draw lines on its surface. Then picking up from your last line, and the same again, dragging it through. Taking a thin knife again, a thin bladed knife, then if you just take the ganache and then just cut straight through. just following the lines. I'm just going to cut about 3 just to illustrate how you can do this. And then just taking the wheel cutters again, we repeat the process. And then to finish it, just cutting down pralines. Obviously it's more time consuming than using a praline cutter, but with a little practice I'm sure you could produce quite a lot from a production point of view in readiness for dipping.